I love Killer 7. Usually I would leave what I think about a game until the very end of the video, but for this one, I can't. But that's not to say it's immune to criticism, because it's not. Oh lordy Lou is shitting not. But I wanted to be upfront here and say this one's a banger, and when it first came out, it blew my mind. Also, I just wanted to go back and play it with a newer perspective. I mean, I'm older and, well, older, and it seems to be good on YouTube to talk about stuff from your past, which always leads to the part where I attempt to be relatable to a bunch of faceless peeps who, like me, wear Sonic the Hedgehog t-shirts in a vain attempt to cling to their youth, like a depressing tug of war. Nostalgia! So it's around the summer of 2005, right? And I'm doing my weekly ritual where I hop on a bus to see a friend in the neighbouring town. Okay, he was my weed dealer, which I tolerated because he did me deals. And I don't mean the sticky icky Cypress Hill shit, oh no. What we had back then was hash, these hard blobs of dark stuff that would get you buzzed, but tasted like it was cut with biro pens and clown spunk. Anyway, every time I saw my quote, mate, he was always playing some kind of game, as he owned all the consoles going at the time. And from what I can imagine, his ill-gotten gains, he always had a stack of new games he was currently playing, so I would roll a few spliffs and watch him play. During these haze-filled afternoons, a few titles spring to mind, like God Hand, which he sucked at, Primal, Chaos Legion, SOCOM How to Suck Off a Navy SEAL 2, and oh, that Britney Spears game that looked like the most doom as shit imaginable. But then saying that, he had an odd fascination with faux jailbait, and I'm going to leave that hanging there like a drooping bollock of ominous world building. However, on this fateful day, he was playing this weird cel-shaded looking game, where he shot these things while conversing with this ghostly gimp, and I was like,
oh my. How many kinks can one single slice of interactive entertainment contain? I must copulate with this game, forthwith.
Yeah, even then I was a wordy twat. After being blown up by a bunch of these giggling freaks, this dipshit I tolerated for cheap bud had a gamer moment and quit. Which is fortuitous for me, as my buddy, I fucking hated him, grabbed the disc out of his PS2 and shoved it into my greasy mitts. And this is how I got my copy of Killer 7. What I didn't know at this time is that this version almost never happened. You see, in the late 90s and early 2000s, the publisher of this game, Capcom, was riding a huge wave of success, with Resident Evil making all the money in the world, so Cappy started gearing up to unleash some more cool shit on the next generation of consoles. The thing is, the long-running producer and creative lead of Capcom's biggest undead cash cow, Shinji Mikami, wasn't impressed by the consoles coming from Sony and the go-getter upstart, Microsoft. So they struck up a deal with Nintendo to bring 5 upcoming games exclusively to the GameCube, the Capcom 5 if you will. And the Mario company needed this boost because by 2002, when this deal was penned, they were in a distant 3rd place behind the PS2 and the X-Bollock. And during this corpo hand shandy and the launch of this collection of hot polygons, Capcom got cold feet and slowly started to backtrack on this deal, with news of its marquee title, Resident Evil 4, being no longer exclusive to the Nintendo Cubed. Which is even funnier considering this fucker in hindsight was ported to everything, because Capcom is and always will be a whore. And while 4 out of these 5 games were being crafted in-house at Capcom, Killer 7 on the other hand was being developed by a team called Grasshopper Manufacturer, headed by someone or something calling itself Suda51, which we would later find out is this fella, Goichi Suda, a fascinating bloke who cut his teeth as a scenario writer for the Fire Pro Wrestling series in the early 90s, who is also infamous for making a super controversial ending of its career mode, where the grappler you play as wins the world title, and then Yeah, this ain't your mother's WWE game. To grasp what Killer 7 is as a game is easy and hard to explain. But who cares about that shit? Let's get straight into what I love about this game. If you have watched my stuff, you may have noticed a pattern in my music choices. And yes, I use a lot of K7 tracks. Why? Are you fucking deaf? Shout out to Masafumi Takada, who made the sounds that are currently tickling your ear canals. He also worked on a ton of Grasshopper games, as well as Danganronpa and God Hand. While I didn't know his name until researching for this video, I've been unknowingly bumping to his tunes for decades. Yes, you could nitpick that this OST is filled with sample packs that were being passed around at that time, but the arrangement is what matters. And these tunes, IMHO, are great, and a perfect baseline for everything else to sit on top, like a duvet made of bacon. Killer 7, just like most of Suda's stories we will later experience, is both simple and borderline incomprehensible, both due to its language barrier and his desire to tell a story that is both wildly chaotic and creative. And an example of this is the person we inhabit in this mess, and his 7 other personas. This is Garcian Smith, a man with a mysterious past, and at a tender age of 13, blasted a team of assassins known as the Smith Syndicate to assimilate their essences into his own body, I think? The first sentence of this story and it's already hurting my brain. Anyway, Garci, who worships the leader of this group, Harmon, who, with the help of this other delightful chap, is tasked by the government of the United States to find and frag enemies of the state, which leads to this cackling greaseball, and leader of the Heaven Smile terrorist group who is infecting the general populace with this demonic power that twists them into these ethereal suicide bombers. Also, there is a hint that this conflict has been going on for hundreds of years, but that's getting in the weeds of the wiki and I don't want to bog down this first taste. Killer 7 can be boiled down into a hearty mix of on-rail shooting, survival horroring, with its pacing and puzzle solving, with light RPG elements, such as collecting blood from every freak you blast to power up your smiths with better damage, reloads and other shit. Also, the characters having their own unique skills to overcome various challenges. So I think it'd be better if we talked about our motley crew. Dan Smith is the coolest shit anime dude, blasting and quipping his way through this world, with the ability to charge his shots for a devastating attack. Kado Smith, a barefoot femme fatale, who is armed with the iconic scope pistol that every Resident Evil 4 player will recognise. And for some fucking reason, every camera angle is angled perfectly so our eye lines are drawn towards her cooch, to the point where I could easily guess what she had for dinner 2 weeks ago. I guess this is just an example of men writing women. Anyway, with her scoped piece, she can precisely lay down shots from a distance and open secret walls by slitting her wrists. She's easily my favourite character. Kevin Smith is a lug that tosses shurikens at foes, and he kinda sucks. But what makes him one of the best personas is his ability to turn invisible, and phase through laser beams and enemies alike, which comes in very handy in later levels. Coyote Smith, a foul-mouthed punk who holds his shooter like a real goon, and has the skills to open locks and jump to higher levels, and apparently he was Suda's favourite character. But to me he looked like a guy who gets way into that Britney Spears game, if you catch my drift. Con Smith is my boy, who channels his inner John Woo, and is a zippy fucker who can run at the speed of sound. Also, I just love the squeak of his trainers while running. I don't know, I just find that endearing. And last but not least, we have the meme lord himself, Master Smith. And if you've never played Killer 7, you may recognise this. Yeah, that's the power lucha right there. He is easily the best character, with his akimbo grenade launchers and his ability to suplex heavy objects, because all of life's problems can be fixed with a head and arm Tazplex, am I right? He can also blow stuff up, like cracked walls and, well, everything else. He's easily the most overpowered of the group, especially when you find various outfits to upgrade his abilities. I fucking love this game. The structure of the game is what I like to call a Kojima special, but instead of the usual Kojima prose, we ain't wasting our times pontificating about making sex on the battlefield. You are tasked with working out various puzzles and collecting items to solve these said brain ticklers, with the emphasis of whatever you do, you are always moving towards the end goal, with few if any deviations from a singular track. Think of it as, like I said, a survival horror game without the backtracking. But that said, the levels can get long, too long in places. But honestly, it rarely feels like a slog, punctuated by satisfying combat, striking visuals, and boss fights, which fucking suck! Look, I swear I don't plan the games I cover here, but yeah, the boss fights are fart noise. You see, when it comes to these tests of skill and proficiency in a game, a good boss fight will push the player to use these newly acquired tricks to see if you suck or not. And there are a few of these fights here in Killer 7 that work really fucking well, if you can ignore some iffy hit detection. However, they are outweighed by these battles of attrition, where we must puzzle or button mash our way through them. Sure, when you are in a tight spot, a very tight spot, the tightest spot that's ever been spotted, you have your buddies to rely on that give you pointers on how to take out these foes. But fuck me, most of these climaxes here are so janky, and this fucking feathered flying rat is the focus of my salty piss streams. Okay, maybe I'm dialing up my ire for audience retention, but yeah. And this fight with another fellow assassin in this western style standoff, where this beast budgie signals the draw by flying off his shoulder, is a striking look, and it is indeed a great idea. However, this fucker twitches like an insert here joke, and if you pull out your piece, when he does indeed twitch, you will get a bullet before you can react. Yeah, once you calm down and pay attention, this fight is pretty easy. But I think you can guess that this showdown is rough, and not matching in tone and feel to the rest of the game. But once again, there is something here I found interesting. While you're running around as one of the 7 asses, if you die, it isn't necessarily a game over. When one of your smiths carks it, you jump into Garci's noggin to run over and collect the bag of giblets left behind. Then you do a quick minigame where you button mash them back to life, which is admittedly a cool idea, and a bit soulsy if you will. 4 years before that became a tired comparison. While I have my gripes with the destination and the suckage within, the story told in these missions is fucking great. And yes, you can stop and catch up to the locals and reoccurring characters for a double shot of Expo, but the level design is the shit that carries the heavy weight. And honestly, trying to talk about the story as a whole robs this of any wonder or nuance. And I think personally, watching videos on YouTube that tell you flatly every story facet of a media thing dilutes the message and headcanon you take away from it. And honestly, I'm fucking tired of dumping exposition on you. So I don't want to go into the dry stuff here with Killer 7, but I do want to talk about how the moments and mood of this game make you feel. Spoilers! And before we get into this, we have to remind ourselves that this was made by a guy who doesn't speak our language. So when it comes to him talking about Western culture through his very Japanese post-punk filter, it's going to read like erotic fanfiction written in Klingon sooner rather than later. And the biggest problem with Killer 7's narrative is that the story is unfinished. In a special episode of Game Informer's Super Replay, Mr. 51 shed some light on what happened behind the scenes.
そう。
About 2/3 of the story content was actually cut. Yeah.
Whoa.
So it was
Wow.
actually pretty voluminous in terms of what was originally there.
なのでカットシーンがだいたい
Now, if you were to put all the cutscenes together, it's about an hour's worth of content, right? Originally it would have been about 3. 3 hours worth of content.
So you said you had to cut a lot of content from your game. Is that pretty typical for your projects, that you kind of scale it down to what really matters? Or was this one a little bit more extraordinary in how much was cut?
Yeah, Killer 7's probably the one that got cut the most.
いやいや。まあ、とにかくやっぱりスケジュールが、まあ、若干遅れたっていうのもあるので、
And, part of the reason for that was that the schedule was a little bit
そう
behind
あ
schedule.
とやっぱり予算内にしっかり収めるっていうところで、まあ、やっぱりカットしましょうっていうことで。
And, of course, there's budgetary concerns. So, being within those budgets is really important too. So, that's what it led to.
What I also learned in my research is that Suda also said that when he was writing this story, he purposefully locked himself away to avoid being influenced by pop culture. And yeah, this feels like a plot far removed from the usual tropes that we had at this time. However, there is a certain theme that runs through Killer 7, and that is, of course, another running thing in these videos as of late, 9/11. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this because I don't think it's appropriate to talk about this day in my stupid YouTube video, but I will say the fallout of this event is handled so much better here than the last game I covered, which used it to pump up the ego of a fucking Mary Sue, who got bullied more than the writer of that fucking guff. While Killer 7 doesn't outwardly reference 9/11, it does capture the mood post that event scarily well. You see, when this attack happened, I was 17 years old, and I still vividly remember the shock of that event to this day. But what I also saw was the news and media going on about this war on terrorism thing. And yes, the people who perpetrated this atrocity should be punished. But when you watched the news and read certain newspapers, there was some blatant jingoistic shit going on. And everything from books to TV shows to games had this boost in pro-military propaganda. Shit, I remember those cringe cheapo shooters, where you played as Johnny Generican, going to take out those smelly terrorists, while jizzing on Steven Seagal's face in a patriotic roar. Sure, it was trash made to pander to fucking idiots. How do you think Cabela made so much money? And I will admit, there is a thrill to playing blatant trash like this. It still made me sick to my nuts. Instead of exploring the dread that we could be harmed in a violent attack at any time, and all the other emotions within, it just boiled down to this gross shit that, in hindsight, was horribly racist and then horribly successful just a few years later. And I could bang on about this like a YouTube essayist learning what the terms postmodern and military-industrial complex mean, but I'm not bragging about my word count on Twitter, so fuck it. What I'm trying to say is, there wasn't much talking about this said anxiety or dread post this event in games that didn't turn into a military stroke fest. And the only one that really spoke about this subject matter and tried to make something of it was Killer 7. And yes, this may be my own projection talking, especially as this game was being made before this event. But intentional or not, there is some thematic overlap here. The politically charged story is one, where we are one dumb idea away from oblivion, and the overall mood and vibe bounce from one extreme to the other. Sure, this world peace thing where everyone fires their nukes into space is an image only the most naive would desire, even though it's somewhat disquieting how many nukes we have, and all the conspiracies surrounding who holds the power to shape the world wouldn't look out of place in a Metal Gear game. But I can't deny there's something going on between the lines here, and this duality of a grim and nihilistic world is then punctuated with delightful schlock, such as when the Smiths have a Mexican standoff with the fucking Power Rangers. And this moment in the back half of the game is a perfect oasis in the middle of all this grimness. And sure, I laughed super hard when this moment happened when I first played it, and it still makes me giggle now. But it's treated like your head is breaching above the water to take a much needed breath. And that's the thing, moments, fragmented sections where the story is really cooking. It's just a shame when the connecting tissue isn't there. Yeah, this is where all the trimming hurts the plot. While the first half of the game is this white-knuckle ride of intrigue, mixed with otherworldly weirdness that keeps you on edge, there is a point where story beats and characters spring up and disappear, where it felt that a moment of foreshadowing for this personal moment should have been established before they were revealed, but it's not here. Such as a point where Harmon disappears later on for no reason, to then pop back up without much fanfare, bringing more questions to the table than answers, and not in a good way. Which I didn't see back then, but now, going back to it with a more critical eye, this sticks out like a boner in a souffle. Shit becomes sparse, and its lack of signposting in these moments brings this whiplash, which throws you out the experience. But that said, I'm not here for the story of Killer 7. I'm here for the other half of it, the vibe, the tone, and this is what I really fuck with. Even though that said vibe and tone is greasier than a certain French auteur's undercarriage. Take Harmon's carer, Samantha, who at first is just a doting maid for this old codger, as he wheels his way through the world, and she becomes a sigh of relief when you see her in a save room, and throughout play you are told without words that this person is safe and comforting, almost like a mother figure, or if you're watching this on Pornhub, a stepmother. But then you notice when you enter this room, sometimes this woman turns into this suggestive figure. A woman who inhabits this sleazy world and uses her assets to get by, which as a guy in his early 20s back in the day may have been alluring. But now something feels off. And yeah, when you get past this weird feeling, there is some shit going on. Especially when Harmon is awake. When he is, Samantha is calm, courteous, and a willing servant. However, when he passes out, she becomes cold and brutal. And there is a certain scene where, in this fragile state, she does a thing to Harmon that YouTube will demonetize this video for if I mention it. And as we all know, if you are a writer and you think you need that to proceed with your story, then perhaps rewrite that shit. However, instead of reacting to what is going on screen, this is a perfect example, and if you want to call it a metaphor, of the tone in Killer 7. This world is completely fucked. Morality is a fleeting moment between selfish indulgence and sudden death. While there is a sliver of good, it is perverted in such a way that this virtue is almost a punchline to a bleak joke. And while I could bang on like a discount store Max Payne, this shocking moment is used to enforce this tone. And yes, I don't endorse this personally. I can see why it was put here. While it's not a horror game in the usual sense, Killer 7 often dives into subject matter that puts you into these states of mind. I mean, every single character did something questionable to get to this point, and it gleefully pushes the player to question why you have grown sympathy for these devils. And during this playthrough, I felt like a ping pong ball, being emotionally smacked from one end to the other by women with spank paddles. Yeah, this analogy needs work. But this is Suda 51 in a nutshell stylistically, where talk is cheap and human life is a buy one get one free offer. It's a stark, brutal world shown in striking cel-shaded sharpness, and I fucking love it. While it's the main focus, the gameplay is almost a lesser priority for me, as getting to the next cutscene or set piece was my main driving force while playing. And yes, the story falls apart by the end, but personally, I don't care. I just love the vibe of this world, and it's just teeming with cool ideas. Dark, mean-spirited and nihilistic ideas, but punching way above its weight in terms of tone and subject matter. It's not just depressing all the time, as there is a line of goofiness to pick up the mood. It knows when to balance itself. And while I could dwell on the what ifs, Killer 7 as we know it now is cool as hell. Sure, it's a wonky fucking places, but warts and all, it sticks into your mind way past the closing credits. And yeah, it would be supplanted by Suda's later, safer, more wildly acclaimed creations. There is a certain dark charm here, a satirical edge that still bites to this day. A journey where the destination means fuck all, but that's okay. All in all, Killer 7 is a trip. Dare I say it, a Suda 51 trip.